Hello, Coach Holmes here, and today we're going to be talking about finding slope. Okay, this is something we actually learned in Algebra 1, but we're going to revisit this a little bit further by putting it in a geometric or geometry-based lesson. Okay, because there's something unique about slope that we can actually use when it comes to geometry. So just to recap, what is slope exactly? Well, slope is a measure of how steep a line is. So if you recall, slope is basically, how high it goes up and how far it goes left to right. So one of the things we actually look at as far as steepness of the slope is the rise and the run of the slope. Remember, rise over run is how we identify slope. Now, the slope formula can also help us determine what the slope is when we're given two different points. So, M, as we actually identify this as slope, because remember, y equals mx plus b, M is your slope. So we are re-identifying M as slope. So the slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So, just to show you what we mean, so if this is x1, y1, and this point is x2, y2, I know from here to here, that's x2 minus x1. And from bottom to top, that's y2 minus y1. Okay, and the same would be true if we apply this on a graph or on a grid. Okay, you just got to remember that the up and down or the rise is over the horizontal, which is the run. So remember, rise over run. Now, so let's say I want to find the slope between two different points. Now, there's different types of slope, but we'll talk about that once we actually get through it. So, for example, if I want to find this slope here, remember, M is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. But one of the things I want to do is just like how I use distance formula, I want to label the points. So I want to say x1, y1, x2, y2. So if I label them, I can go ahead and plug them in accordingly. So for example, I replace y2 with 7 minus y1 is negative 4. Now, if I replace the x2 with 5, I replace x1 with 3. Now, what do we know about the two negatives? Well, they become positive. So I'm going to have 7 plus 4, which gives me 11. 5 minus 3 is 2. So that's going to be my slope. Now, the type of slope that this is called a positive slope, as if it's going up 11 over to the right. Now, a different kind of slope would be if I put a negative in front, that would be called a negative slope. That's when it's going down from left to right, okay? Positive is going up left to right, negative is going down left to right, okay? Next, I have two different points at 2, 6 and 2, negative 4. So I want to plug this in accordingly. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So negative 4 minus 6. And then 2 minus 2. Well, I know that negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. And then 2 minus 2 is 0. Well, the type of slope that this is called, which is, that's how you find, that's the slope. But the type of slope this is called an undefined slope. It's not really able to define because we're divided by 0. You can't divide any number by 0. So this is an undefined slope, which means it's going to be a vertical slope because the only value we have is the rise. We can only go up and down, which means that's our rise. Next, we're going to have the 2 points, 3, -2, and -8, -2. So I'm going to say x1, y1, x2, y2, and I'm still going to plug them in accordingly. So I'm going to go -2 minus -2 over -8 minus 3. Well, I know the two negatives are going to give me a positive. So -2 plus 2 gives me 0. -8 minus 3 is going to give me -11. And of course, 0 divided by -11 gives me 0. So this is an example of a 0 slope. Okay? Notice how there's not really a value that technically rises. There's no value telling me to go up. But there's a value telling me to go left to right. So this is a flat horizontal slope, which we call a 0 slope. A good example of a 0 slope will be like the floor. You don't want to have floors leaning one way or the other. It's flat. So a flat surface is a 0 slope. Now, how to find parallel and perpendicular slope? Well, there's different ways, but what we actually come to find out through years is that for parallel, they're the same slope. If you have two lines that are parallel to each other, they're going to have the same slope. And rightly so, because they're never going to intersect. And if you change the rate just by a little bit, you eventually will get an intersecting line. Now, perpendicular is a little bit tricky. It is the opposite reciprocal I spelled that wrong. Opposite reciprocal of the slope. So for example, if I'm given slope as a over b, well, the perpendicular slope will actually be negative b over a. So when we mean opposite, we're changing the sign. And when we mean reciprocal, we're flipping the fraction. So we have to be able to do both in order to recognize perpendicular. Next, I want to be able to find what type of lines are they? Are they parallel? Are they perpendicular? Or are they just regular intersecting lines? Or neither, basically. So first off, I want to look at the first line right here. So remember, I want to label this x1, y1, x2, y2. So once I label them, I'm plumbing accordingly. So I'm going to do 4 minus 0 over 7 minus 1. Well, 4 minus 0 is just 4. 7 minus 1 is 6. Which we know that to simply be 2/3. Once I be able to simplify it. Line 2, however, remember, I still want to label it x1, y1, x2, y2. So my slope is going to be 6 minus 0 over 3 minus 7. So if I subtract them out, so I'm going to get m equals 6 over 3 minus 7 is negative 4. And if I simplify that, that's negative 3 over 2. Now notice how I basically flip it, which the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3 over 2. Notice that. But also, one's positive, one's negative. So since they're both opposite and they're reciprocal of each other, those two lines are perpendicular. Okay? Now, next thing I want to do, this is a typo, but I want to be able to identify two different lines and figure out the parallel and perpendicular. So remember, for line 1, label them as x1, y1, x2, y2. So my slope for the first line is going to be 7 minus 3 over negative 5 minus negative 9. Well, I know that this becomes positive, so I'm going to have 7 minus 3, which is 4, and negative 5 plus 9, which is a positive 4. So my slope happens to be 1. Pretty simple enough, pretty easy. Now, again, still want to label them accordingly. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So here's my line 2 for it, and I'm going to say m equals 10 minus 6 over negative 7 minus negative 11. Well, I know 10 minus 6 is 4. 7 minus negative 11, well, that becomes a positive because of the two negatives back to back. And I'm going to get negative 7 plus 11 gives me a positive 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So since I have the same slope and they're the same number, those two lines are parallel. So we have to be able to identify whether or not two slopes of a line are perpendicular or parallel, given the points. Okay? But as long as we know how to figure out what the slope is and know how to find it, all we gotta do is be able to recognize whether or not the two slopes are the same, which makes it parallel, or find the opposite reciprocal of the slope, which basically means I'm flipping the fraction and changing the sign. So we will have to be able to use this in order to solve equations tomorrow. Thank you and have a good day.